Welcome, everyone. My name is Ali Bunting, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Operations at CanWaCH. It's great to see so many people here today. I think at this point, I can see 106 participants, and I know that we had close to 200 people registered for the call, so that's wonderful to see such a high number and turnout. I'm joined today by my colleagues from CanWaCH. So I have Antu Hossain, who's the Global Health Impact Officer with me, and Caitlin Reed, the Senior Communications Officer. And I will be co-facilitating today with my colleague, Melody Tondeur. She's our Manager of Metrics, and she will be leading the Q&A portion of today. So today's webinar is being held with colleagues from Global Affairs Canada regarding the updated International Assistance Results Reporting Guidelines for Partners, which is a bit of a mouthful. We are excited at CanWaCH to have this opportunity to facilitate this exchange, and I'm so pleased to be joined by Caitlin Hindman, who is a Performance Management Analyst, and Sarah Turcott, who's a Performance Management Advisor with Global Affairs Canada. The guidelines were updated in 2018 with the support of a task force comprised of Global Affairs colleagues as well as sector partners. And Global Affairs continues to seek input on the guide, and we're so pleased to be able to facilitate this opportunity to gather feedback to share back to Global Affairs afterwards. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, and you are encouraged to write your questions down in the chat box or to raise your hand when the time comes to ask your questions out loud. We will do our best, time permitting, to get to all the questions, and we will also collate the questions that we receive through the survey and through the chat box to send back to Global Affairs as well. Et une note en français, bonjour tout le monde, c'est un plaisir de vous voir ici aujourd'hui. La présentation aujourd'hui sera en anglais, mais j'aimerais vous encourager à poser des questions en français. N'hésitez pas à les demander en les écrivant dans la boîte de chat ou en levant votre main pour les demander à haute voix. Merci. So today's webinar will be approximately 1.5 hours long. We will begin with a presentation from Global Affairs on the updated guidelines. And we will then enter into a Q&A session covering questions that were submitted on the updated guide in advance. As many of you know, we circulated an online survey for questions and feedback on the updated guide a few weeks ago, and we've collated these questions in advance and sent them to Global Affairs. The survey is still open, and you can submit your questions via the survey in case we run out of time during the call. We are just now posting the link. This should be coming through from one of my colleagues in the chat box. So if anyone wants to fill out the survey during this webinar, please feel free to do so. And we'll share the survey link at the end of the webinar as well. Following questions and responses to the survey questions, with the remaining time available, we'll move to an open Q&A period with a chance to ask questions to Global Affairs. And if they don't have questions at the ready, I'm sure that we will take the questions back to them and in writing so that they can respond at another moment. So with that, it is my great pleasure to present Caitlin, who will be presenting the guidelines. And welcome, Caitlin. I'll turn it over to you so you can just unmute yourself, and your PowerPoint is there for you.
Thank you, Ali, for the great introduction and this opportunity to talk to CanWaCH and all your members. So my name is Caitlin Hindman, as Ali said. I'm a Performance Management Analyst with the Results-Based Management Center of Excellence here at Global Affairs Canada. So we're responsible for the guidelines as well as providing RBM materials and guidance for the international assistance stream. And I also just wanted to take this time to thank you all for participating in today's webinar, as well as for participating and sending questions and comments through the survey. This will be very useful for us when we update the guide moving forward. Just a bit of additional housekeeping, as Ali mentioned, the presentation will be done in English today, but we're happy to do a French session as a follow-up if there's enough interest from CanWaCH and its members. We're more than happy to facilitate a French session as well. All the information for today will also be provided in English and French for you to follow up. All right, so with that in mind, let's move on to the presentation. Perfect. So this is just our presentation outline for today. It's broken down basically into two sections. The first is a description of the guide and the information in the guide, with an emphasis on what is new in this version. And then in the second section, we'll do a more detailed, we'll go over the templates and the report outlines in a bit more detail. So as mentioned, the reporting guide was released to staff and partners in July of 2018. And we'll go over today a summary of what Global Affairs Canada requires in reports and why we need it, as well as information on how to prepare your reports and the templates that you'll need. So the purpose of the guide is to help partners who are implementing global affairs funded projects to produce clear, readable, and evidence-based reports on results which meet the standards for reporting to Canadians and the Government of Canada. It's also to support the implementation of the Feminist International Assistance Policy and to help global affairs officers determine what is reasonable to expect from partner reports and to help inform their work plans and decision-making on reports. I'm going to use the term results and outcomes interchangeably throughout the presentation. So again, they mean the same thing for us at Global Affairs, and they shouldn't be confused with outputs. The audience for the report is partners, but it's useful for us on our side to know what we're asking of partners and therefore what to expect, as well as for partners to use the guide so they know what Global Affairs is looking for and why we need it. So as Ali mentioned, the Task Force for Improving Effectiveness was kind of a key driver in the update to the previous reporting guidelines. One of these solution teams was on narrative reports, and they basically proposed several recommendations to reduce the administrative burden and improve project reporting. All of their recommendations were implemented and used to update and create this beta version of the report. So some of those recommendations were the elimination of duplicate information that was already provided in other documents, and also to clarify and make a key distinction between operational reports and operations reports and results reports. So that is where a lot of the driver and kind of impetus for change came and why we have a beta version that we have now. So as you'll see, the report guide distinguishes between two main different types of reports. So those will be your operations report, your results report, and then the third is a combination of the two. So it's an operations and results report. And so these are terms that we'll be using throughout the presentation. In terms of results reporting for Global Affairs Canada, we wanted to also present the needs and the purpose for the report, because that's often something that comes back to us as not being clear from partners when they're reporting, as well as from officers as to what exactly are we using this information for. So essentially, the needs are that the department needs partners to report on change. So that means that when we're reporting on results, the emphasis should be on results and not activities. Again, activities and outputs aren't outcomes. So we're looking for clear reports that summarize progress made on or towards the expected outcomes at the immediate, intermediate, and when possible, the ultimate level. So we're going to talk more about progress on and towards later in the presentation, but it's a good framework to keep in your mind. In terms of other needs, we need evidence-based annual results reports that use actual data that clearly illustrates progress being made. So that's where we're collecting it on each indicator based on the collection frequency in the PMF. We're using that data for analysis to assess the progress towards those results. And then we're using that as evidence for our narrative sections in the results, in the reports. In terms of the purposes, this is used for project monitoring and results-based management during the implementation of projects. So that is used by Global Affairs Canada to know how the progress is progressing and if they're achieving change. So implementers should be using the worksheets to provide that information and make those assessments. And then we're also looking in the narrative sections of the reports to see that change and for project monitoring. It's also used at program and corporate level decision making and to ensure that we are tracking and reporting on our portfolio of projects related to the Sustainable Development Goals, the expected outcomes and objectives for partner countries, as well as our commitments under the Feminist International Assistance Policy. And finally, it's also used to communicate results to Parliament and the public. Again, since we are a government department, we're accountable and we have to report back to the Canadian. So as you know, the Feminist International Assistance Policy introduced 6 action areas. We're not going to go into detail about those today, but we do want to emphasize the change in approach from reporting on thematic areas in the past. So you may remember gender equality, human rights, and environmental sustainability used to be called cross-cutting themes. We don't report on those in the same way anymore, and they're no longer considered cross-cutting themes. Another change is that the department is now looking to highlight innovation and experimentation in its projects. So in the previous reporting guide, like I said, you were asked to report separately on those themes, but now we're asking you to integrate that content into your narrative section. That decision was made because it was sometimes difficult to see the connections between the areas and see how those themes were impacting the results. So the solution team recommended doing a more holistic narrative and more integrated content to see if it would be more clear then how that was impacting the results and the achievement of the results in the narrative. So as I said, for partners, what this means is that you'll be asked to report on the priorities in a fully integrated manner in each section of the report. It also emphasizes reporting on changes that have occurred during the last reporting period and cumulative. So when I say changes, that could be changes to the context, changes to the operational environment, as well as your changes in terms of results. So what this means in a more tangible way is if you're looking to integrate gender equality, a change to the context could be anything from a change in policy, a change in the law, or the local environment that has a direct impact in your project. So you would want to also maybe identify any opportunities or new entry points to integrate gender equality. For example, there may be a new local partner that you could work with or that may help with one of your activities. And then when you get into the operational changes, you'll want to mention the types of actions undertaken or adjustments made to address that context. And then when you're talking about results achieved, you should be looking at data collected on the indicators to assess progress made. Again, related to this gender equality example, but it could be any type of sectoral example there. So again, it's the changes to the context, operational changes, and results achieved that should all have the priorities integrated into them fully. So in terms of setting the stage for reporting, in order to be able to effectively report on the project, the partner needs to prepare in advance. It's not midway through the project or a year in when you're starting to prepare your report that you have to finally gather all this information. So it starts right at inception and even when you're submitting your proposal. The project implementation plan is developed during the inception phase. That's when you're validating your logic model as well. You are also completing and validating your performance measurement framework or PMF. And the implementation stage is also when implementers confirm and test the project design. So that's the theory of change, logic model, indicators, and gather the baseline data. So you really want to make sure that at project inception, you are really setting yourself up for success during the project. This also means that it's important to allocate the resources, which can be time, money, and effort to collect data, including your baseline data, upfront. And by upfront, I mean 90 days usually after you sign your financial agreement, or if you made special requests or modifications to your financial instrument, there should be a timeline for collecting baseline data. If you notice that you cannot collect on baseline data that you've identified in your PMF, it's important to identify that early and modify your PMF accordingly. Essentially, you want to find out earlier rather than later whether you're going to have challenges reporting on and collecting data. So again, managing for results during your project implementation involves collecting data on both output and outcome indicators. And this is the information you'll be using to compare your planned outputs, actual outputs, and your expected outcomes to actual outcomes. And that will help you achieve results and maximize the achievement of results. We do, again, like to take this as a reminder that the implementer has the primary responsibility for collecting and analyzing data on all the indicators in the PMF, according to the frequency and data collection method indicated in the PMF. So this briefly describes your steps in preparing the project results report. So every template that we're going to go through, we'll do that at later details. This is really just kind of a high-level discussion of what the steps are to take, but we'll go through the templates and outlines towards the end of the presentation. So essentially the main tasks are first to organize your information, and the best way to do that is to fill out your outcome reporting worksheet. That's where you're going to enter the indicator data collected to date, again, based on the frequency identified in your PMF. Here you don't want to focus on activities, but on the data collected on indicators identified to measure each outcome. Then you'll use that worksheet to assess the progress made towards the targets by comparing them also with the baseline data. All this information will be useful to you as you fill out your different reports. And finally, like I said, you'll use the information of the outcome reporting worksheet to support your analysis in the reports. Finally, some of our general guidance is to minimize the use of jargon, to write as clearly as possible, and to always think of the purpose and audience of your report to have clear results reports. Beyond that, we designed the tools and the outlines specifically to address 4 common problems that we often saw when partners and everyone was reporting on results. So the first common problem was that the report concentrated on activities and products and services, or outputs, instead of activities. Instead of outcomes. So for example, they would focus on the training delivered and the number of people who participated, but they wouldn't talk about the change and the outcome. So again, just providing a narrative about activities doesn't actually tell us about results and the changes being made. A second common problem was that the report would include results, but no indicator data. So it would talk about outcomes achieved, but it was hard to have confidence in those outcomes if there was no data to back it up. Again, we're looking for that evidence base for the achievement of those outcomes. A third problem was that the report didn't include indicator baseline data, so it was hard to assess progress. So for example, if 32% of 1,000 patients were cured within 7 days of a new treatment, but it didn't tell us the baseline, it's hard to tell if that treatment actually got better results than what they were doing previously. You don't have anything to compare it to. And then finally, a fourth common problem is that the information in the report is not put together in a way that the reader can easily understand. So essentially, the reader was having to go and check multiple pages, multiple tabs, multiple places to compare information to get the full story and the full picture. So in creating the tools that we have and in providing the guidance we have, we're hoping that it's easier for the reader to assess the report and assess the progress made. So another new change in the guide is that we're now asking for stories of change. And so the purpose of stories of change is to convey in narrative how the project is affecting lives and communities, and to also illustrate the theory of change on impacting social norms and structural change, but again, having that human dimension. So in our consultations for the guide, many partners expressed that they did not have a place in the department's current reporting templates to include these types of stories that they often had a lot of. And the solution team also noted that partners were often being asked in an ad hoc way to provide this type of information quite often from the department. And so the hope is that integrating these stories of change into your annual reports will decrease that burden of ad hoc requests. So again, these anecdotal stories of change are important for the department to see how the projects are actually impacting people's lives and to add that human context to the data and the information provided. So when we ask for stories of change, we're asking for partners to provide at least one results story associated with an immediate or intermediate outcome in the annual project results report and an intermediate outcome in the final report. So the story of change can include the use of evidence, which can be personal testimonies or other forms of evidence, to ensure that it's providing interesting information that's relevant, simple, and powerful, to make sure it's a tangible human story. They can also use photos and quotes as long as they're not kind of posed or overly forced or contrived. And then we also want to make sure that we safeguard the security and interests of the individuals and the communities that are involved in the story and ensure that you're obtaining any type of documentation or consent required. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to move on to the templates now. I think this is where there may be more questions as well. So first, we're just going to see the performance measurement framework, which you should all be very familiar with, and which links to the outcome reporting worksheet. So you can hit next again, please. So the PMF and the outcome reporting worksheet are very similar. The PMF is probably one of the first templates that you're most familiar with, along with the logic model, since it's one of the ones that you fill in before your project is even approved. And it's a key document that you should be using from project inception all the way to its completion. It's essentially a plan to collect relevant data on your performance indicators and to assess project made on achieving results. For more information specifically on how to fill out the PMF or how to develop the PMF, we recommend looking at our RBM how-to guide. It really sets it up in more detail. So again, this is just a reminder that if you set yourself up well for reporting at the inception and design phase, then you set yourself up well for the entire project. So now we'll see the outcome and reporting worksheet. So essentially, it is very similar to the PMF. It's just been modified in a few columns. So it's a working tool that should be used in preparation of writing your annual results report and the final results report. And it's really your evidence to support your analysis and your narrative summaries of your outcomes. So it must be included as an annex to the results report. And, like I said, the annual as well as your final report. It's really designed to help you organize your information and focus not on activities, but on the data collected for the indicators you identified to measure each outcome. So when it's completed, it should tell you in clear terms what changes you've seen in indicator data, and this should help you assess what progress you're making towards the indicator target. And like I said, you can use this assessment as your core explanation and provide a bit more details on the progress on or towards your expected results. So it helps you put all in one place the data for your outcomes and then use that data to explain your progress. So there are two options provided in the guide for how to set up your outcome reporting worksheet. You can either copy and paste information from your PMF, or we recommend also saving your PMF as a new document and then simply modifying the columns required. So the 4 new columns, in the outcome reporting worksheet are the actual data for previous reporting period, actual data for this reporting period, cumulative data, my voice is going in a bit in and out again, and then analysis of progress and variance. So for your actual data, for every indicator, you're expected to provide actual data as per the collection frequency identified in your PMF. So that's very important. Sometimes we get the question of, do I have to report on everything? And essentially, you're expected to report on the frequency identified in the PMF. So again, that's why it's important to update your PMF if necessary. Our next is cumulative data. So even if you don't have new data for the current reporting period, you should enter any actual data you may have from previous periods to show what has changed from the inception of the project until the current reporting period. And then finally, the 4th column that was added for this worksheet is the analysis of progress variance. So that's where you're actually analyzing the data against the baseline and the targets and briefly summarizing progress either for current or cumulative period. And that's, again, where you want to explain any of the variance that could have occurred. Yes. And so again, that analysis is really the foundation for your reporting in your narrative sections. And that's where you're going to get all your information in one place. And they should line up so that when the officer is reading your narrative section and they flip to your worksheet, the logic should be there and it should be consistent. So now we'll move on to the other worksheet. But first we'll see the outputs and activities matrix. So again, this is a tool you might have been familiar with before the reporting guide, since this is the tool you'll use in your planning. So this is the tool that expands on the logic model, and it's used to sort key activities by their outputs and immediate outcomes. So in the new reporting guide, the outputs and activities reporting worksheet is basically this matrix, but expanded with more columns. So the output and activities reporting worksheet is going to be an annex to your project operations report and your final report. And it is made to facilitate reporting on outputs and activities. So this one is not about results. It's really about operations. We expect partners to submit this twice per year, but this may vary based on the schedule found in your financial instrument. So the key columns that have been added are 1, the indicators from the PMF, 2, your annual target from your annual work plan, 3, the actual data for that reporting period, 4, the actual data cumulative, 5, the end of project target, and 6, the status to date. So that is really just meant to be a brief, very brief update of whether it's on target, ongoing, delayed, of that nature. It's not supposed to be an expansive analysis. It's important to flag that in the first year of the project, there may not be that much progress that you can report on your immediate outcomes. So when that's the case, the narrative summary can use data from the output and activities reporting worksheet to summarize what outputs are being delivered and how they are expected to contribute to immediate outcomes. So now we're going to move on to the report outlines. So a key distinction is that these are outlines and not templates. So there is some flexibility. We just wanted to provide you with an outline that you could easily work within and that would have all of the components that we're looking for in our reports. So you're free to use them for your narrative reporting. So first is the project operations report outline. Again, as we've mentioned kind of so far, the project operations report is really focused on activities and outputs. So it provides an operational update, on implementation of the annual work plan. The schedule that your schedule for presenting this report to the department may vary based on your reporting requirements as per your agreement. So whether it's a contribution agreement, a grant agreement, it should state how often you will be expected to provide this report to the department. This report is also a monitoring and management tool to help you and the department follow the progress on activities and output. In your narrative assessments throughout the report, which appear in the changes to context, changes to project governance, and changes to risk and analysis sections of the report, these should be used to highlight relevant issues that require adjustments or changes made to respond to problems if these have occurred. They should also include what needs to be done in order to achieve the outcomes moving forward. So we don't just want to see kind of a report of all the problems, we also want to see you identify what you're going to do to ensure that we're achieving results moving forward. So the next section is the progress on outputs and activities. So in the section on progress on outputs and activities, that's where you'll be analyzing the actual data in the outputs and activities reporting worksheet for all the indicators measuring each output, again, against their corresponding baseline and target. That analysis of that worksheet is your basis for the narrative. You also want to describe how the project is progressing and determine whether activities are leading to outputs and whether outcomes as planned are, whether the activities are leading to outputs and the outputs are leading to outcomes, and any changes that might be necessary to the activities for the next reporting period. In the operations section, as I mentioned, you'll be reporting on any changes to project governance. That could be major decisions made at steering committees or management issues that have been affecting project implementation or performance. In the report on changes to risk and analysis, you'll want to identify any new risks or changes to previously identified risks. And again, you want to focus on what action is going to be taken to address or mitigate the risk. And in terms of annexes, that's where you'll be including your activities reporting output and activities reporting worksheet. Sorry, it's always a mouthful to say, but to that. So we are going to move on to the results report, but before that, we do want to clarify what progress on and towards means. So when you're reporting on outcomes, we use the words progress on or towards. And the difference, essentially, if you don't have progress on, whether it's too early, you can be reporting on progress towards. So progress on is defined as an actual change in the value of indicators being tracked for the respective outcome or output. An outcome or output is considered to have been achieved when its targets have been met. Whereas progress towards is defined as an actual change in the value of indicators tracked at the next level down in the logic model, with an explanation of how they are expected to lead to the higher level outcome. So for example, if you don't see any change at your intermediate level yet, you can look down to your immediate level indicators and explain how you expect the changes at the immediate level to contribute to the changes at the intermediate level. Yes, so I think that's kind of the simplified way of explaining the rest of that, but it goes into a bit more detail on the slide. So now we'll move on to the annual project results report outline. All right, so again, this annual project results report is about reporting on outcomes or results and less about activities and outputs. So it should include an assessment of progress on or towards the achievement of outcomes, annual and cumulative information on the progress during the life of the project, evidence, data, and analysis of that evidence and data, and information needed for Global Affairs Canada's project browser, as well as any recommendations of adjustments required for the next reporting period to ensure that outcomes are achieved. So the main tool for this is going to be the outcome reporting worksheet, which we looked at earlier. So that's where, as we discussed, all of your data and information that you need for your analysis that is held and where it should inform your narrative. Again, we just want to underscore that in this report, detailed descriptions of activities should not be included. So in order to report on progress on or towards the expected outcomes, you should analyze the data in your worksheet. You want to also ensure that all narrative text not only describes the change that's taken place, but also provides context. So what we're looking for is context about where the outcome occurred, so the region or specific community, who and how numerous the beneficiaries or intermediaries were who experienced that change, and where relevant, the examples should include evidence to illustrate progress. Also, any factors that could provide additional context should be mentioned. So if there are any changes in political context or disasters that impacted the achievements of results, those should be mentioned in that report. We also want to emphasize that you can also report on unexpected outcomes that occur. So that's something that may not have been planned for or noted in the PMF, but if you're really seeing changes that you want to measure, it's a great place to integrate them as well. So there you'll be reporting on cumulative progress, current progress for the reporting period, progress towards the outcomes, variance, as well as the stories of change, which we mentioned earlier. So the outline is broken down by outcome level. So it starts with the ultimate outcomes and the intermediate outcomes, where you're asked for narrative assessments, variance, and corrective actions if necessary. And then immediate outcomes, where the only other difference is that you're also asked for a narrative assessment of that specific reporting period, not just cumulative. There's also a section on reach. Third, there is a section for any changes to the theory of change, logic model, and PMF. If there are changes to those documents, you should also include the latest version of those tools as attachments to the report. For any lessons learned, actions taken, recommendations, and next steps. So those are any kind of improvements that you've noted, best practices or lessons learned that are worth sharing. And then the annexes for that report are the outcome reporting worksheets, communications documents, a list of partners, as well as any special appendices that you've agreed to provide based on your financial instrument. So the final project reports and operations report outline is very similar to the annual report outline. It's kind of a combination of the two, so I don't want to go over too much of the same information. So essentially, it's your annual project report with additional information on your outputs, project governance, risk management, and then your annexes to that report include the outcome reporting worksheet and the output and activities reporting worksheet, so both worksheets, communications, your list of partners again, and your special appendices. And we really want to put emphasis there on that report being kind of the final report that people will look at to see the impact of that project and how the results were achieved, as well as get the lessons learned for other projects or programs. And so here we've just included an example of what it means to get your indicator baseline target and the actual data and transfer that into a useful narrative statement. So here, our immediate outcome is improved proficiency in math by girls and boys in primary schools in District Y and Country X. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll just see that that information has been provided in a narrative context. So this is a presentation of cumulative information. So you'll see that it's since the start of the project. There's been a significant improvement in that. And then you'll see sprinkled in the data that was in the previous table. So 50% scored a minimum of 60 out of 100 in math. This is an increase from the baseline. Similarly, the end part of that paragraph, we see what this actually means. So this means that there's a greater possibility that students will transition to lower secondary school after successfully completing primary education in school. So we're really translating the data to what it means for the outcomes and the achievement of the outcomes for the project. So now we'll just go to the other tools. So these I just want to draw your attention to, and we won't spend that much time on. The first is a checklist for reviewing results reports for implementers. So this is basically the tool that project officers will have on their desk when they're reviewing your reports. So it's a checklist for them, but it also helps partners know exactly what officers are looking for when they're reviewing the reports. So I encourage you to also print that out and look through your report and see, if I was a project officer, would it meet all these criteria, or would they be coming back to me for additional? Finally, we have a list, there's a list of other resources that may be useful. So the first is the RBM landing page, which houses all our tools, checklists, tip sheets, everything basically that you could be looking for. It's also where you'll find the reporting guide, our regular how-to guide and glossary, and some other interesting tip sheets. And we've also included a link to our project browser. Now we can get to the questions and comments. Thank you everyone for being so active in the chat. I think that'll lead to some extra great questions as well.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. And thank you everyone for your participation and for sending your questions. So at this time, we'll go ahead and we will be asking the 9 questions that we received prior to the webinar. And a reminder that also to ask your questions, so you can include them in the chat. And as well, we will be looking if any one of you is raising your hand if you want to ask a question out loud. And if you're connecting by phone, we also wanted to say that you have to press *9 to raise your hand. So thank you very much. I will go on, Caitlin, with the first answer that we received prior to the webinar. If we could simplify the reporting structure, what are the required priority sections versus the ones that are nice to have?
So all of the sections in the current reporting guide, so the beta version, have been identified as required elements. So either that feed into our project management or feed into corporate reporting. So the elements from our previous guide that were identified simply as those nice to haves were removed for this beta version. So those were elements that either were repeating information in other places, so either within that report or in other documents. So those have all been removed. If you find during your reporting process that you're still repeating information or that information isn't used, flag which sections those are in your feedback to us, and maybe we can streamline it even further. But right now, those seem to be essential elements.
Thank you, Caitlin. And now on to the second question. How flexible is Global Affairs with the format used? Example, can we add the PMF as an attached Excel file?
So we are quite flexible to the format used for the report itself. As I mentioned, there are kind of outlines for everything. And so we are flexible. We recommend talking to your specific project officer before you submit your report. That way they know what they should be expecting. And that way they'll be able to tell you if they will have any issues accessing a certain type of file, etc. But you should be able to submit your report. In terms of the PMF, that should only be attached if there are changes in it. You'll want to include your outcome reporting worksheet as what you're attaching with your report. Like I said, the PMF is only necessary to attach if there have been changes. But in terms of Excel file, that should be fine, but check with your project officer.
Thank you. The third question is, for components such as gendered environment, which are not always captured sufficiently by the PMF, but yet are critical to the project, where should we report these?
So when I first read that question, I was struck by the "but yet are critical to the project." So if they're critical to the project, technically they should be in the PMF and they should be being reported on. So that may signal that you need to modify your PMF and continue to monitor them moving forward. So again, if they're critical, they should be in the PMF and you should be reporting to them in your narrative section. You can also report on unexpected results. So say you weren't anticipating a certain sector to be important, but it starts coming out in your reporting that it is, then you can report on unexpected results as well. But if they are critical to the project, they should be in the PMF.
The fourth question, how often do we need to include more details about cumulative results to date?
So in your worksheets, the best way is to continue to include cumulative results. That will help you identify when you are seeing changes and aren't seeing changes. But you only really have to mention them in your narrative when you're seeing change. Alternatively, if you don't see any change, then you may want to report on why you're not seeing change. You should be updating the information in your worksheet as per the collection schedule of your PMF. So I would always update the cumulative, not communal. Continue to update the cumulative information, but only report on it when it's relevant. Or only mention it in the narrative when it's relevant.
The fifth question, how flexible is Global Affairs to let projects adapt the structure of the report based on the context, number of countries where programming is taking place, all focusing on different thematic areas?
So we are quite flexible to adapting the structure of the report. As I mentioned, they are guidelines and tools for you to use. We have provided those outlines to streamline where possible and have as much consistency as possible. That helps our project officers. It also helps partners know what's expected of them and what we're looking for in the reports. However, if this is not meeting the needs of your project to accurately explain and report what's happening, then we're open to looking at kind of different country annexes or different ways to report on that information based on that project. So we, again, want to avoid duplicating information or adding to your reporting burden, but we also want to make sure that we're getting what we need out of it. So the previous guidance did mention specifically having country annexes for multiple country projects. And I think there is still a clause in the contribution agreement that does allow for flexibility for multiple country projects or different needs based on the project design. So again, that's look at your financial instrument first and contact your project officer just so that there aren't any surprises and so that they know what they should be expecting to see in your report and to discuss any additional flexibility needed. It's also good to flag to us that this is guidance that is still needed in the next iteration of the guide, just how flexible we can be and where to make those.
The sixth question, many projects, as per terms in the contribution agreement, are not expected to submit semi-annual reports. So should they follow the lead of the Global Affairs officer and follow a reporting structure that works for Global Affairs and also fits the context in the project? How is the updated reporting guide in line with an organization's contribution agreement with GAC? Both documents are asking for different information. Which ones does an organization use?
So I will always refer you back to the financial instrument that you signed. That will tell you how often you have to report and what guidelines you should be following. So the new beta version has been integrated into the contribution agreement that was updated in September 2019. So all of the newer contribution agreements that were signed after then will refer to these guidelines specifically for how you should structure your report, and so follow those guidelines. If you are reporting under the old contribution agreement, again, refer to the guidance referenced in that agreement and report that way. If you would like to use the new guidelines and templates, then feel free, we encourage it, but talk to your project officer again so they know what they should be expecting and what's going to come in. In terms of the frequency, that will depend on your specific agreement. So if you are only required to report annually, you can submit your results report as well as a operations report, still separate, but at the same time annually. Whereas if you're required to again, this is under the new contribution agreement. So if you're required to submit reports semi-annually, you would do the operational report twice and the annual results report once. But again, refer back to your specific contribution agreement or financial instrument for your requirements specifically. But you should be following what you signed, essentially.
Seventh question, would there also be similar guidelines on project implementation plans and annual work plans that would allow faster standardization, consolidation, especially for multi-country, multi-year projects?
So the guidance does not currently exist for the PIPs and the annual work plans. However, I have shared kind of the request for this guidance with my team. So hopefully this is something we could explore doing in the future, and it is something that we have had requests for before.
Now, the eighth question, will there be training or technical support in the beginning on how to use the reporting template? Will Global Affairs allow for the reallocation of funds to orient field partners to use the new template?
So this is a bit of a multi-pronged question. In terms of the department and technical support, we're open to these types of sessions where we do webinars and try and kind of inform partners as much as possible on the changes to the guide and what that means for them. We're also trying to, and we will be publishing FAQs that will be shareable with your organization as well as other organizations about the guide and other materials. And we're looking into other ways to share information and socialize the requirements both internally and with partners as well. In terms of the transition for the guide, it's worth noting that it shouldn't significantly change what you've been doing in terms of reporting. It's more about how you're presenting the information. So we have always required partners, but we have been requiring that partners report on change and report on results and not just activities for a long time. So that should be baked into how you're managing for results and how you're managing for your projects. What's different now is the emphasis on results. So that's why we've separated the two reports so that you really get that emphasis on results, but it should still be part of your regular managing for results process of implementing your project. In terms of the reallocation of funds, that's really a conversation to have with your specific project officer. And it also kind of reaffirms the point that we made earlier that it's important to plan for these funds and to plan to be able to collect on everything in the PMF right at the inception stage. But if you have specific concerns, that is more of a project level conversation to have with your project officer.
Thank you. Et maintenant, une dernière question en français. Comment faire la mise en œuvre d'un projet? Comment élaborer des budgets qui tiennent compte de toutes les exigences de l'AMC?
Donc, à l'heure actuelle, il n'existe pas de conseils pour les partenaires pour l'élaboration du plan de mise en œuvre du projet ou des plans annuels de travail L'accord de contribution énumère tous les éléments qui devraient être inclus dans le plan de mise en œuvre du projet et dans le budget. Et il y a des guides et des conseils pour ça, mais nous avons noté que d'informations et des directives supplémentaires ont été demandées pour les PIP et le budget aussi. Donc maintenant, on n'a pas de matériel supplémentaire pour ces éléments-là, mais pour ceux qui sont reliés à la gestion axée sur les résultats, on va discuter comment on peut améliorer nos ressources.
We are done covering the questions we received before the webinar. Thank you to those who sent those questions, and thanks for your answers, Caitlin. We received a lot of questions through the chat, so we will go through them. And if we don't have time to go through all of them, we will be compiling them after the webinar and send them to Global Affairs. The first question that we received was, how does this project management and monitoring speak to the increasing recognition of principles of complexity, which tend to require different M&E approaches?
In terms of the increasing complexity, I think that that can be reflected in the narrative section where you're asked to integrate all of the relevant factors. So by not kind of separating that information, but by integrating it holistically, you should be able to talk about how those complex factors are impacting your ability to achieve results and how you're going to mitigate that and kind of manage for results moving forward. So hopefully the structure of the report facilitates that kind of the way of analyzing that and presenting that information. If it doesn't, then we still need to adapt our tools and we can look into that. But the idea behind merging the kind of different sector sections is that you should be able to explain how those ideas and how that complex situation talks to itself and kind of how those ideas interact with each other more easily.
Now on to the next question. Does the annual report include an operation report as appendix? What is the frequency of that reporting? Every 6 months or only for April-September reporting period? And we also had another question related to the annual report, saying the annual report doesn't ask about program governance and management administration, even though this is part of the annual work plan. Should it be included?
The first part of the question, I think, was, is the operational report as an appendix to the annual report? So yes, so you should be submitting both reports. Again, if you are required to report annually, you'll be submitting both the operational report and the results report. If you're required to report semi-annually, you'll be submitting the operational report at the semi-annual period, and then both the annual results report with the operational report as an appendix, as a second bundle. Again, the reports, it's attached as an appendix because they should still be separate because we want to see both information. In terms of the governance and management issues, that should be reflected in the operational report. So that's where you can explain in narrative any changes that are relevant that would impact the project.
The next question is saying you seem to be asking for two different versions of the PMF, i.e. PMF and outcome reporting sheet. Is there an opportunity to streamline, i.e. to add the additional columns to the existing PMF rather than asking us to save the file as a different document and reformat?
So I think there is an opportunity to do that, and we're happy to get feedback from partners on how they do that and what works best for them. So the idea of the outcome reporting worksheet is that it takes out some of the PMF columns that you don't need for your reporting, that you need as a planning tool, but not as a reporting tool, and adds the columns that you need for a reporting tool, but not necessarily a planning tool. So if in using both these tools, partners identify ways to simplify those worksheets and to still be able to tell us all the correct information, then you should be able to do it in a way that best meets your needs. And then we can look at modifying our templates or modifying our guidance. Again, we want to alleviate the burden on partners as much as possible while still being able to get the information that we need and that you need to manage your project. So we're open to updating the tools as we get user feedback, essentially.
Next question. It would be helpful to understand Global Affairs' interest in always having baseline data within 90 to 120 days of the contribution agreement being signed, as this seems to pose a lot of challenge for partners, and it's not clear why they need it so quickly.
So the standard contribution template clause does include a 90-day timeline for your baseline. In the past, I think this was designed because often without that 90-day timeline, it was taking a very long time to get that baseline data, and then it would then delay other parts of the project and reporting, etc. It's worth noting that the contribution agreement is a negotiation, and if there are particular factors that will impact baseline data collection, that is a conversation that you can have during that negotiation to look at an appropriate timeline for collecting your baseline data. It would be a project by project negotiation, but that is a tool available to partners. If you know that you won't be able to collect it in 90 days, that should be identified before you sign your agreement.
Une question en français. Pourquoi inclure des progrès sur le résultat ultime annuellement? Et pourquoi on ne rapporte pas sur les résultats immédiats?
Je vais commencer avec le résultat ultime. S'il n'y a rien à rapporter, c'est correct d'identifier ça. Si c'est très tôt dans le projet, les premières années, on n'a pas vraiment des résultats ou de l'information sur le résultat ultime et même pas sur les résultats intermédiaires. Donc, c'est difficile de faire le progress on ou progress towards. Mais plus tard dans la vie du projet, on veut encore identifier et rapporter sur le résultat ultime, qui est un peu la raison d'être du projet. Aussi, si le projet est pour une durée plus longue, on va peut-être voir du progrès sur le résultat ultime. Donc, c'est important de se souvenir de pourquoi on est en train de faire, de mettre en œuvre le projet. Et c'est pour cette raison-là. Pour les résultats immédiats, il faut encore rapporter sur les résultats immédiats dans le rapport annuel. C'est juste, je pense que sur notre petit diagramme dans la présentation, que pour garder de l'espace, on n'a pas mis le résultat immédiat, mais on est supposé de rapporter sur ça aussi. Donc, on va peut-être ajuster notre présentation pour clarifier ça.
Next question, can you please clarify the progress towards, especially for immediate outcome versus duplication of output activity reporting?
Yes, so the progress towards is really most useful when you don't have enough information at whatever level you should be reporting on based on the data available. If you don't have enough information there, then you can look at the level lower and the information that you do have to report on that. So say you're trying to report at your intermediate level outcome, but you don't have enough data to show a change. You can look down to your immediate level outcomes and the indicators that you have there to see if you're seeing the types of change that you're looking for, again, based on your data, your targets, your baselines, and based on your theory of change to say, we haven't seen a change yet that we have data on for the intermediate level, but at the immediate level, we're seeing all these changes, and based on our theory of change, we can still see and assume that these changes will lead to a change at the next level. So it's really just looking a step down where you do have data for, and then falling back to your theory of change for why you think that the data at that lower level is still going to contribute to the higher level change.
The next one, do you have examples of good theories of change reporting at intermediate outcomes, levels, stories of change, etc.? This was from Pascal. Pascal, if you are able to perhaps unmute yourself and clarify for us.
Any examples along those like theory of change, stories of change, examples of how to report on the intermediate outcomes that you find are well done, so that we can use them as a kind of concrete examples when we look at the guidelines. I find them very clear. At the same time, when we have conversations with our PTLs at Global Affairs, sometimes there's different type of requests. So if we had concrete examples and try to align ourselves on some of those ideas, not as kind of the way to do it, but as parameters, that would be helpful. So any examples of those things that we're talking about that would kind of be a complement to the guide.
That complements a lot of the feedback that we received in the survey as well about a lack of more examples in the guide. So that's definitely something that we will be wanting to add to the guide moving forward and that we've had requests for. In terms of good examples of those to date, so far we don't have that many in-house, and we will want to go and get those. We also just need more programs and projects to be reporting based on this new guide so we can get those examples. So because the guide is only tied to the latest version of the contribution agreement, we still have a large percentage of our project portfolio reporting using the old guidelines. So essentially what that means is a bit of a wait and see approach, just so that we get a wider variety of examples that we can look through and identify what the strengths and weaknesses are, and then share those internally and with partners as appropriate as well. But like I said, we don't have that many great examples that we're ready to share yet, but we recognize the need for more examples in the guidance.
Thank you, Caitlin. And actually, there were quite a few questions related to that example, best practices, etc. So thank you. The next question: it is challenging to report annually at the immediate and intermediate outcome levels on a population basis during the years between assessment. Example, year 2 in a 4-year grant or the year before the final evaluation. What suggestions do you have for partners, as this reflects an evaluation issue that then impacts the ability to report?
I think I'm interpreting it as a bit of a two-part question. So in terms of the availability of data, I would just make sure that that's clear in your PMF as to how you're going to report on data and how to ensure that you're getting that data in a timely fashion and being realistic on when certain data is available to be collected. In terms of the best practices for how to do that, I think I'd have to consult my colleagues a bit and get back to you as to their experience of what they could recommend for partners, because I do see where the issue is coming from, and I just want to be able to provide a more concrete response to you. So yeah, I think I'll consult and we'll get back to you on that one.
The next question is asking, is there a page limit for any of these reports?
So technically, there are no page limits to the reports. The aim is to create a concise report that is not overly repetitive, that gives us all the information that we need and that accurately reflects your report. So when it can be shorter and more concise and clear, the better. But if you feel you need space to explain certain things, then that's okay as well. But we do want to emphasize that we're trying to decrease the burden on partners to report. And so be as clear and concise as possible in your reporting, but try to meet everything that we're requesting so that we don't have to do a lot of back and forth. It will also depend on the context of your project, the size, the complexity, and all those other factors. So that's why we haven't really set page limits now, but you're encouraged to be as concise as possible.
So now we have 2 related questions. So is for blended finance related projects, RBM frameworks, example LM and PMFs, are less relevant. How to address that issue given the increased GAC focus on impacting investing blended finance going forward? And related to that comment, with multiple funders, it is ideal to have integrated reporting. Any comments on that?
I'll take those as 2 separate questions in the way I address them. In terms of blended finance, we completely recognize that our existing tools do not completely reflect the blended finance, repayables, innovative finance world. And so we have been working with kind of our colleagues that are working on those types of projects to adapt our tools to that. So far, we've been doing that work on a case-by-case basis, so we don't have guidelines that are completely shareable, but that work is being done, and we are trying to adapt our guidance and tools for that type of project. Again, we completely recognize that our standard tools don't completely capture the whole picture. In terms of the multiple funders, for projects with multiple funders or where we're working with multilateral organizations, the department is flexible and tries to abide by principles of good donorship to accept different types of reports and not to kind of force all donors or all organizations to use our tools and templates. So if it is a multiple donors project or it's a multilateral, there is flexibility in the tools. Again, that's a conversation that you should be having with your project officer so that they understand the tools that you're using and what you'll be providing in your reports. It's also useful. There is kind of some additional homework that has to be done and conversations that need to be had just so that everyone's on the same page of exactly what they're expecting in that report, as well as any definitions that may vary from other donors' approaches to results-based management and project management to global affairs. So there's a bit of, like I said, kind of additional homework that has to be done and conversations that need to be had so that the project officer and the organizations are on the same page. But we are flexible to those situations.
The next question, when is it appropriate to start completing the outcome reporting worksheet? The first year?
I think it depends on the context of the project and what information is required in your PMF. So the reporting frequency of those indicators, as well as your specific context of your project. If you just got off the ground 3 months ago, you won't have much to report. So it'll depend on your reporting frequency and your schedule, but you should be kind of, yes, again, I would just say based on the reporting frequency in the PMF, when you can start collecting that data and that information on those. But if I missed anything in that question, we can always follow up additionally.
Thank you. Now, just a question on reporting on ultimate outcome. Wondering if the guidance on this has changed vis-a-vis attribution versus contribution and expectations for measuring and reporting.
Global Affairs Canada understands that we can track contribution much more significantly. Kind of, if you're thinking of one of our tip sheets where you have the ultimate outcome at the top, intermediate, immediate, and then you have your outputs and activities, that it's kind of a scale from contribution to attribution as well. So we recognize attribution on things that we can control, things that the partner controls. And then once you go further up your logic model towards the ultimate outcome, we completely understand that we're really looking at what we're contributing to that, and that you really can't attribute an entire so that it's not completely attributable to this one global affairs project, that change. So we're very cognizant of that, and our guidance reflects that, and that you can explain that in your narrative as well. But yes, we don't expect you to be attributing an ultimate outcome change to a small global affairs project. The degree of that contribution may vary based on the size and scope of the project as well as its timeline. So again, those are kind of more project-specific contextual factors, but we completely recognize the difference between contribution and attribution.
This next question is from Jakob from Salenga. He says that Kinaki, their mail tool that they have developed, can easily generate reports based on these GAC templates from project data. His question is, can data be submitted in Excel, or even better, is there a chance that GAC officer could review and provide feedback on the reporting results directly in Kinaki together with the submission of reports in Excel?
So first, in terms of Excel, we're quite open to those reporting in Excel. From what I hear, it's a semi-common practice. So for that specifically, I would encourage you to talk to your project officer, again, just so that they know the format that it will be coming in and how they'll be reviewing the information so there aren't any surprises there. But in terms of usability, Excel is a pretty accessible tool on our end, and I would say semi-user friendly. In terms of Kinaki, we did see that feedback come in through the survey. It's a tool that I'm not particularly familiar with, and that the department would have to look into more systematically before we recommend that officers use that, again, from kind of a more corporate perspective. But we are definitely open to looking at new tools and seeing what we can recommend in terms of best practices, but it's not something that we're particularly familiar with yet. But thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. So now there's two questions from a participant that is saying that there's a lot of different guidance coming from desk officers on how to use this template. So the first question is, what do we do with results report when there is no measurement in the PMF for that year? From some officers, we have been told to submit with all sections not applicable, while other officers have asked us to just write progress towards all immediate outcomes by talking about outputs. However, I think this defeats the purpose of separating operations and results as per the common mistakes section of this presentation. Is there any guidance you can give on this? And then perhaps I'll ask a second question as well from the same participant. Is there an in-depth training to desk officers? Are you receiving feedback and updating the template based on feedback? This presentation is identical to the one I watched in 2018.
So in terms of the first question, I think we will touch base with project officers to ensure that we're providing more streamlined guidance, so that if you are asking a question, you are getting a more systematic or consistent answer. Without knowing the specific details of those projects, I would agree that simply repeating the information across reports does kind of defeat the purpose of those reports. So we will touch base and try and make sure the guidance on our end within the department is more clear and systematic. And we'll reach out to project officers and try to socialize that better and socialize the guide as well. Yes, so recognizing that more guidance is needed for project officers as well and not just partners. In terms of the second question about training and the guide, so the guide is the same beta version that it was last year. With that in mind, we want officers and partners to use the tools and use the guide before providing too much feedback to us. So we want to make sure that you actually try them, test them, and then tell us what the feedback is. As much as we get encouraged to change and adapt, we also want to make sure that you know what tool you're supposed to be using. So we don't want to change too many of the tools kind of midstream and then have you find out after you filled out a tool that you thought was still valid that you actually have to use a different tool. The tools right now are kind of as they are. We may be trying to clarify a bit of the guidance, but if we do make any updates to the guide, we would provide that information to you, update the guide, and also update in an FAQ or another type of update exactly what the changes have been made so that you're all aware. But there is not an intention to change the tools for your next reporting cycle from what I'm aware. So again, keep an eye out for any changes. This is a beta version, so it's subject to change moving forward based on feedback. But we don't want to spring those changes on you unexpectedly. And we also don't want to just continue making changes to the point that you can't actually use the tools and compare your use of the tools.
Okay, and now we will be taking the last questions because we are going to be running out of time. The last question is, are charts and graphs allowed to present progress on outcomes in addition to the narratives and tables?
As long as you can present the information in a way that the project officer can understand and that is an accurate reflection of the project, then feel free to use tools like infographics, different ways to explain that data. That should not come at the expense of your narrative explanation, and it shouldn't replace your data worksheets and having that information available. But if it's something that you feel kind of adds value, then feel free to explain things and use those type of tools. We don't expect that of you, but if you find that it adds value to the report, isn't duplicating information, and isn't being used to avoid providing a narrative explanation, then by all means feel free to represent and display the data in a different way, or a complementary way, I should say.
So thank you very much. This will end the webinar and it's time to wrap. So we wanted to thank Caitlin and the colleagues at Global Affairs for being here today. Thank you all for participating. Thank you to the ones who filled out the survey. We will be sending the link again now in the chat. You're welcome to submit more questions, feedback as well. Also, thanks to my colleagues at CanWaCH who supported during this call. And we hope that you found this webinar fruitful. And based on the call, we will be collating all the questions and resources to share back with Global Affairs. We apologize, we did not have time to address all of the questions that you shared and the feedback in the chat, but those will be made available in a report. The recording will be shared with you all as well. And now we would love it if you could take a few minutes to do a quick poll to provide your feedback on the webinar. Merci à tous, merci à toutes.
Thank you so much for everyone who took the time to tune in. Merci à tout le monde pour votre participation. And again, if there is interest for a French session, we're more than happy to provide that. And all the materials will be available in French as well.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you all.